Reducing exposure risk, you can locate a ground-mounted antenna where unauthorized access is not possible. Fence it off, you can do something like that. Mount antennas as high as possible. Don't point antennas at occupied locations. So reevaluate your station when you change equipment and assure your station stays in compliance with FCC safety regulations. And again, there's the calculator URL. So carefully evaluate the NPE exposure of indoor stealth antennas in occupied areas. What do you mean by stealth antenna? Generally one that's not visible to your neighbors.
It's HOAs and apartments.
Yeah. So you might, hams have put the antenna in the attic or even around the joint between the ceiling and the wall, so it's up around there, inside, indoor antenna.
There's several cases out there on YouTube if you want to go look where people have used their metal gutters as antenna.
You can use your rain gutters if you're in an HOA and they don't let you have an antenna. You can use rain gutters. I didn't have a HOA problem, but for the longest time, my antenna was two non-insulated wires simply laying on the roof. Just laying right on the shingles, whether it rain or shine, it worked. You can make an antenna out of a wet noodle. So,
It doesn't mean they work as well, but they will work some.
Yep.
So who's in an apartment building or a rental house? Anybody? Are we all own our own homes? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you ever find yourself stuck in one, you can put a Dish Network dish up, and you can turn a Dish Network dish into a 2-meter antenna with just a cut and a slot.
Make sure the MPE limits are not exceeded in occupied areas. Locate VHF, UHF mobile antennas on the roof of the vehicle or on the trunk lid, preferably on the roof. Why? Why would you want it on the roof instead of the trunk lid?
Higher.
That's radiation
It's
pattern.
above your
We're
head.
talking about
It's
MPE.
above your head.
Right. Metal roof protects.
So if it's on the trunk lid, it's radiating right through the back window, towards you. If it's on the roof, it's radiating above you and you're not affected. But still, all of that is, you take it with a grain of salt, because at the power levels we use and the amount of time we're transmitting, the duty cycle level, it just isn't going to affect.
Okay. You may not transmit that much. Some of us don't know how to turn that little button loose.
Exposure safety measures. Use a dummy load when testing a transmitter. What's a dummy load?
You call your neighbor.
I hate to use terms that people aren't, familiar with, because it just goes on through and they lose the whole thing. A dummy load is something that doesn't transmit. The signal goes in and it's 50 ohms and the receiver likes it, the transmitter likes it, but it doesn't go anywhere. It gets contained pretty much. So you can test the transmitter that way without actually putting a signal out on the air.
Well, much of one.
Much of one.
You
There
can't
will
always
always be some radiation escape.
There'll always be some, but so when you're working on feed lines or antennas, you want the power off, turn off the transmitter, disconnect the feed line. And again, this is pretty obvious stuff. If you're working on your own equipment, you're not going to be transmitting when you're out there working on the antenna that's connected to the equipment in your shack. So, reduce the power of your transmissions. An amateur station must use the minimum transmit power necessary to carry out the desired communication. Most guys are fine with this. You'll hear some jerks on
No, call them leads.
higher power than they need to, and they're splattering their signal wider than they need to, and getting people upset because they're taking up more space in the band than they need
Steve,
to.
we don't call them jerks. We're nicer than that. We call them lids. It's a radio term. What's that?
How do you know how much power you need?
So if you're making contact with your other station, then once that contact is made, you might say, I'm going to lower my power down to 50 watts, see if you can still hear me fine. And you do, and he says, I don't notice any difference at all, you can keep it at 50 watts. And then the other station will do the same.
So you're adjusting it after contact?
So you just, after they make the contact, you test it out.
Right.
So, I've got a friend that is in Ham, that is 3 blocks away. And if we're talking on HF, we turn our transmitters to 0. Because none of them actually go to 0, there's some minimal amount of power. So we'll make contact, oh hey, and we'll just turn it all the way to 0, because that's all we need to make contact between me and I. If we're trying to get a hold of somebody else, we might have to turn the power up in order for that person to be able to hear us further away.
And you are all going to start at the technician level transmitters on VHF or UHF.
Yeah.
So line of sight transmissions. So consider the fact that while your radio may put out 50 watts, you need 5, maybe.
So
Start there.
Well, I started high. So it depends on what I'm doing. So at home, I know I can reach the repeater that I own on 5 watts. So it just stays on 5 watts on that transmitter. On Simplex, that's going out radio to radio direct, and so I leave it on high power, 50 watts. And then when I make a contact, then I will go like, hey, I'm going to back off, and I'll bring it all the way down to the lowest I've got, which is 5, if it will do that and still make the contact. And we have meters on our radios that tell you how strong the signal is coming in. And so he will say, yeah, I don't notice any difference. You just use your ear usually. But you can sometimes turn it down to the lowest power possible and still have a full S9 signal, which we'll get into what an S9 is, and 1s and 2s.
Yeah, we did this test just the other night on JC AriesNet. We did our regular check-in, and then we went to simplex frequency, and we did the check-in again. And some people had to use a relay because they couldn't hear net control, or net control couldn't hear them, and would ask for a relay and do it that way.
So we've got 30 people check in every Monday night, and there's only about 3 or 4 of them that I cannot hear radio to radio. There's a way we can do that. And so we don't need the repeater.
Well,
The repeater allows me to use 5 watts, not 50, to get those people.
and like you said, antenna's everything.
Yeah.
If you have a good outside antenna, you can get down to pretty low power. If you're using your rubber duck on your HT,
So if you're trying to call the same guy from the same location every time, and once you figure out you only need 5 watts,
Right.
it's generally always gonna be 5
Yeah,
watts.
pretty
much.
If you
Yeah,
figure
pretty
out that the weather or nothing's gonna drive.
Propagation can change, but generally, yes.
yeah, we'll get into propagation a little later, but for the most part, you're right.
Yeah, in the mobile I use in my vehicle, the low setting is 15 watts. And 15 watts for VHF and UHF is usually perfectly
That's a
adequate.
lot of power.
It's a lot of power. Because I have a high setting of 25 on that, and I never have to turn it to 25.
Mine has 4 power stages on it, 5, 10, 20, and 50. I rarely set it up to 10 watts.
This is important. Listen more, talk less.
What does the T stand for?
Technician
Is that
manual.
Technician manual?
Check, yeah, it's a
So
technician
the G
manual.
is
Correct.
gonna be the general.
Correct.
Yes.
Got it.
Okay, for the newbies, we are now into test questions. These are the actual questions that you will find on the test. We covered,
Possible.
yeah, it's possible. There, and the technician exam and the general exam, both question pools are in excess of 400 questions. Your test will be 35 questions, randomly selected.
So if you look in the back of your book, that T0C01, it's a letter, a number, a letter, and a 2-digit number. That is the actual test question that you can find in the back of your book. And those are exactly the question, the correct, and all 3 bad answers, okay, or incorrect answers.
This is the entire question and answer pool.
They are the exact wording. However, the order of the answers may be changed on your test. But those are the exact answers that you'll be provided with. Any of the slides, if it's got the little red book, that's a technician. If it's got the blue book, that's a general question.
And please make notes, okay? T0C01, if you look that up in your book, the book also has the reference data that supports the answer. So you can go back and read that thing, reference by reference by reference, and find out exactly what you don't understand, and either fix it or figure out what question you want to ask us.
Or call Dave, and he'll hook you up. But first, exhaust your resources of using that to look in the back of the book, to find where it is in the manual.
You love it when people volunteer.
Oh, yeah.
Not volunteer, that's not volunteer, that's voluntold.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right, well, let's start this. So I want people to shout out when they know the answer. With Alpha,
there we go.
Bravo, Charlie, or Delta. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, or Delta.
How many cops do we have in here? Ex-cops. Who else uses the wrong stuff? Cops and who?
Cops is it, I think.
No, the FAA uses the ICAO, which is what we use. Okay, so no cops, so we won't
So
have any.
what type of
alpha, beta,
radiation
dog
are
crap.
radio signals?
Able bait dog.
Able bait.
Delta.
Delta.
Bravo.
That's correct. Charlie. So if you're going from 100% to 50%, you can increase by factor 2.
And if anybody is unclear, speak up. We will not be upset and go like, oh, I don't get that.
And we'd rather not come back later. So if you've got a question, the right time to ask it is now. Let's get it straight.
Okay, what factors affect the RF exposure of people near an amateur station antenna?
Delta. That would be dark.
Dog.
Why do exposure to limits vary in frequency?
Delta.
There we go. What hazard is created by touching an antenna during a transmission?
Bravo.
Yeah. The following actions can reduce exposure to RF radiation.
Alpha.
Now, how can you make sure your station stays in compliance with RF safety regulations?
Bravo.
Bravo, consensus? So SWR doesn't make any difference. You could have a high SWR, and if the antenna is too close to somebody, it's still going to radiate.
Standing wave
Standing
ratio.
wave ratio, we'll get into that more. That has to do with the efficiency of the antenna to radiate.
So if it's in an answer that's wrong, it could be total BS if they just made up. The ones that are important, we will get to, but yeah, they do put some certain.
And be aware that some of the answers to these questions are downright comical.
Some of them are actually wrong.
Yeah.
But they're the question and the answer they want. And, you know, so get
Why
that.
is the duty cycle one of the factors used to determine safe RF radiation exposure? Alpha? Yeah. What is the definition of duty cycle during the averaging time for RF exposure? I hear an alpha. Any others?
It's not alpha.
The percentage of time the transmitter is transmitted.
You are looking at the transmitter working cycle.
So it's whenever it's actually transmitted.
Correct. And you are comparing the on time to the off time as a percentage.
Which of the following is used to determine RF exposure from a transmitted signal? Delta? Yep. How can you determine that your station complies with FCC RF exposure regulations?
C. Charlie.
How about the others? What do you think? Delta. So all of them. You can calculate based on FCC bulletin. You can do the calculation on a computer model, or you can measure using calibrated equipment. But generally, we don't have access to calibrated equipment, and it's easier just to do it on a computer where it's been pre-modeled.
And I'm going to toss something out here just for all of you guys that are, as you're putting up your first stations, there's a bunch of us here in this room that have some pretty good calibrated equipment. If you want us to come over and take a look at your station before you fire it off and see if that antenna is actually going to do the job you want to do, give us a call.
And our fees are very reasonable. Very, very reasonable.
Yeah, most of us work for popcorn.
I don't work for Bob. I'm on a carnival, firstborn. No, I'm not a carnivore guy.
So what does time averaging mean when evaluating RF radiation? Time averaging, what does that mean? Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, or Delta?
Who said alpha? We don't do anything over 24 hours.
Bravo or Delta?
Delta.
Is Delta. The reason it's Delta is we're just interested in how much radiation is getting absorbed by our body over time.
So one of the things with taking the test is that, and I don't know about this one particularly, but you know, alpha's kind of really mixed. Yeah. A lot of them you can throw out 2 of the distractors, and then you got a 50% chance between the other 2, even if you don't have a clue what the question is. If you don't know the answer, try that.
Yeah, that's good test-taking strategy.
So,
Which of the following is an acceptable method to determine whether your station complies with FCC RF exposure regulations? Again, this is pretty much what they...
oh yes, here's the other
I think this is the same question.
It is the same question. This one, however, is in the tech manual. The other one was in the general manual.
The other thing is, most government tests, if there's an all of the above, unless it's there for every question, that's the answer, right? Not on this test.
No, don't take that
These
for
ones
granted.
will put it in there as a distractor, and it's not, so.
What is the one way that RF energy can affect human body tissue?
Alpha.
How does RF radiation differ from ionizing radiation?
Alpha.
Who is responsible for ensuring that no person is exposed to RF energy above the FCC exposure limits?
Bravo.
The station licenses. You are. What must you do if an evaluation of your station shows that RF energy radiated by the station exceeds permissible limits for possible human absorption?
Alpha.
Alpha. What's the effective modulation duty cycle on RF exposure? Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, or Delta?
I like D. Hey, transmit more power, you're exempt.
Alpha, a lower duty cycle permits greater power level retrenchment. Which of the following steps must an amateur operator take to ensure compliance with RF safety regulations?
Charlie.
Charlie. What type of instrument can be used to accurately measure an RF field strength? Bravo. A calibrated field strength meter with a calibrated antenna.
Anytime I say accurately, better be calibrated.
So most hams, at least a lot of hams, have a relative field strength meter.
Yes.
Which is very useful because then you can accurately test 2 different antennas at the same distance and you know which one's putting out more power. It'll tell you that. But it won't tell you exactly the power level.
Yeah,
It'll just say which one's more, which one's less. What should be done if evaluation shows that a neighbor might experience more than the allowable limit of RF exposure from the main lobe of a directional antenna?
C. Go to Charlie.
Charlie, take precautions to ensure it won't be pointed in their direction. What precautions should be taken if you install an indoor transmitting antenna? Charlie. What stations are subject to the FCC rules on RF exposure?
Who said alpha?
Delta. All
It's
stations
always
with
the
a
alpha.
time average transmission of more than 1 milliwatt. That was one of the first slides.
Don't go any further.
I read it backwards.
You read it back, okay.
Yeah, I read it backwards.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure you understand. Okay, good.
How much is a milliwatt? 1,000th of a watt. Okay. Adjusting or repairing an antenna, what do you need to do?
Bravo.
You don't need to wear the radiation badge. What must you do if your station fails to meet the FCC RF exposure exemption criteria?
Okay,
Yep. All right,
Okay,
I'll turn it over.
take a little break.